Eastern and Poppy Harlow in New York. John Berman has the day off. The first major victory of the all-Republican-led tax initiative is not even yet signed into law. And now already a shutdown is potentially looming and potentially turning into a crisis. As we speak, Republicans are battling Republicans, Republicans are battling Democrats, Democrats are battling Republicans, House members are battling senators, all over keeping the government that U.S. taxpayers fund up and running. The stopgap spending bill that has been in effect for just 2 weeks, it runs out at midnight Eastern on Saturday. That is just 38 hours from now. The president just wrote this on Twitter, quote, House Democrats want a shutdown for the holidays in order to distract from the very popular just passed tax cuts. House Republicans don't let this happen. Pass the CR, the continuing resolution today, and keep our government open. Our Sunlen Sarfati is on the Hill watching all the back and forth. The only thing is, you know, if all the Republicans were on the same page on this thing, they wouldn't need a single Democrat.
That's right, Poppy, and this really highlights the problem right now that House Republican leadership is having. A lot of the demands and the competing demands are among members of their own caucus. So what they're trying to do right now is to push through these competing sets of demands within the Republican Party and really coalesce behind one actual proposal. But that right now doesn't have a way forward, so they've had a lot to figure out. Now, some of the key sticking points that are still on the table, and not only from Republicans but Democrats here, is the Children's Health Insurance Program, which expired in October. FISA warrantless surveillance program that expires by the end of the year. How much, if at all, defense spending will be included in there, and how much, if at all, disaster aid will be included as well. So a lot of issues on the table to sort out. The House Rules Committee is meeting this morning to try to come behind one specific proposal and put a path forward. And there is some optimism that although right now there is not a clear path forward, right now there's not agreement among Republicans on how to get there, that eventually at some point today they will be able to get there. Here's the chair of the House Freedom Caucus, Mark Meadows, with some tepid optimism this morning.
We're hopeful that we vote later today. That has not been scheduled. Honestly, there's a little bit more work to do, but I believe at the latest tomorrow morning. And so hopefully we're breaking news right here with you, Allison, but that's a decision that will get made by our leadership.
So if agreement in the House and if they vote it through, it would then, of course, need to go over to the Senate. But across the board, certainly behind the scenes, Poppy, Republicans privately admit that they simply do not have an appetite to force a government shutdown by midnight tomorrow night. They don't want this to end, this stalemate to end that way, particularly because it's a big week for them on tax reform. So certainly a desire to avoid that confrontation, although there is, at this hour, no clear path forward yet.
Sunlen on the Hill, let us know when you have updates. Thank you very, very much. Now to a crucial moment at the United Nations. Take a look at this. Live pictures out of the UN General Assembly, where any moment a vote is expected on rejecting a resolution from President Trump, on a resolution to reject President Trump's choice to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Now, President Trump is threatening to cut off U.S. funding to any country that votes against the U.S. on this, and this also means big allies in the Middle East. UN Ambassador Nikki Haley says she will be taking names, and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu rejects the results of the vote before it even happens, calling the UN a house of lies. Our military and diplomatic analyst John Kirby joins us now. This is set to happen in just moments. This is a follow-on vote from the Security Council vote on this, where the UN was alone. I mean, totally standing alone on this one. And that's the way it is obviously expected to go here in the General Assembly. You say this is the president, in your words, cutting off his own nose to spite his face. Why?
Yeah. Well, because foreign aid and assistance, first of all, we don't know what kind of money he's talking about, whether it's foreign aid and assistance or it's defense military sales or what. But whatever it is, we do those things for our own benefit and for the benefit of our allies and partners. We spend that money to help enhance security and stability in other places around the world so that those problems don't migrate elsewhere. And so that we, the United States, have a stake and a vote in how policies and programs in those countries go forward. When you cut off that funding, and I don't believe he's actually going to do this, Poppy, but if he did, you basically remove America's influence and interests in those parts of the world, and you open up a vacuum where other countries like Russia and particularly China, when we're talking about Africa, would gladly step in and fill our shoes. And again, then we lose even more influence in what's going on in those parts of the world. So it's incredibly self-defeating and childlike.
It's important to note this is symbolic. This does not have teeth. However this vote goes, it doesn't change things. And we know how this vote is going to go. The U.S. can and has now recognized the capital of Israel as Jerusalem. But this is ahead of the vice president's trip to the region. One of the places he's going to be going is Egypt. This comes on the heels of the Turkish president to President Trump directly this morning saying, Mr. Trump, you cannot buy Turkey's democratic will with your dollars. I mean, why say you're going to cut funding if you're not actually going to cut funding? Doesn't that just make the U.S. look foolish in this?
Well, we already look foolish in terms of the decision to declare Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, but that's another point. Who knows why this president makes these kinds of threats, but I honestly can't believe that he would be so stupid and so foolish to actually do that. And you talked about symbolism, Poppy. Yes, it's symbolic in the terms that it's not going to change the Trump administration's decision to declare Jerusalem as the capital and eventually move the embassy there. But the symbolism ends there. It is a stunning rebuke of the decision by the United States to do this, by the international community. That alone is not symbolism. That's a big deal. Number two, it's going to essentially set back any chance of reaching a two-state solution and a peace process in the Middle East for who knows, maybe forever, certainly for years. So what he's done and the international community's response to it really does have practical, tangible outcomes there in that part of the world.
Indeed. Admiral John Kirby, thank you very, very much. Let's talk about this and more, the potential government shutdown, with our political commentators, Maria Cardona and Doug High, and CNN political analyst Nathan Gonzalez. It's nice to have you all here. Nathan, let me begin with you. Just your assessment of, we know what we're going to see happen at the UN, as Admiral Kirby just went through. But what do you think, will there be any ramifications from these key allies in the Middle East, like Turkey, like Jordan, like Egypt, if the Trump administration does try to actually pull that funding if they vote against the U.S., which they're expected to, or do you think it's all bluster?
Well, I think as Admiral Kirby said, I think it depends on what actually comes after the vote. And I think what we've seen from the president is there's a big difference between the tweets and sometimes the action that follows. But what I do know is that for the president's supporters here in this country, I think they love this. They love the saber rattling. They love the threats. They love, sticking it to these other countries. This is something that I think helps them with the base, but it does provide some certainly uncertainty when it comes to what's happening with our allies overseas.
All right, let's talk about the potential government shutdown. I can't even believe I'm saying that. 38 hours from now, it is possible it could happen. Doug High, to you as a Republican strategist on this, who works so closely with the RNC. Paul Ryan was so confident yesterday, when he was asked on the Today Show, is the government going to stay open? And he said, absolutely it is. I think maybe not so confident now, 24 hours later this morning. And the president's now blaming Democrats on Twitter. He's saying it's up to Democrats. They want this to happen. It's up to Democrats. It's actually up to Republicans. If they can all get on the same page, they don't need a single Democrat.
Yeah, Poppy, I worked in the House of Representatives when we had the 2013 shutdown. That was a divided government, and I'd tell you it was still Republicans' fault that the government shut down. We brought it amongst ourselves, or onto ourselves. The difference is here, obviously we have Republican government wholesale, so that means we'd be responsible for this. But what I'm hearing from sources at the Rules Committee in the House and the House Appropriations Committee is that they feel pretty confident that they can get a short-term CR, pass a separate supplemental bill, and they know that Congress could ruin Christmas, which is why they're working hard to prevent Congress from ruining Christmas or ruining the New Year. And politically, it would be a disaster. And if I could say, Poppy, real quickly about Jerusalem, as you know, I've not been Donald Trump's biggest fan. But the difference, what we're seeing from Donald Trump right now is Barack Obama promised that he would move the capital to Jerusalem. George W. Bush promised that he moved the capital to Jerusalem. Congress has overwhelmingly voted to do so. Donald Trump's fulfilling a promise that he made to the American people. I think that's something that we should applaud, regardless of how we feel about this issue or that issue. He promised to do it, and he did it. And I think that's a good thing for a president to do after so many times when presidents have walked away from that promise to Israel.
Every president has promised to since that 95 vote. All, their staff will tell you, all well knowing that they weren't actually going to act on it. But I hear your point. Maria,
we should keep the promises we make. That's important. And Donald Trump's doing this in this case. And again, I've not been his biggest supporter, as you know.
That's
but here he's fulfilling a promise that he's made to Israel, and I think that's a good thing.
Maria, to you, looking at what is, being battled over here now. You have defense spending in this potential government shutdown.
Yeah.
You have, FISA and that surveillance ability. You also have children's health insurance.
Yeah.
I mean, you have this CHIP, this bipartisan program that provides funding for medical care for children whose parents are sort of stuck in the middle. They don't make enough to pay for their children's care for these crises and these diseases, but they make too much to get, fully government funded for that. 16 states are going to totally run out of funding, they say, by the end of January.
Yeah.
20 more states to follow. So, I mean, how far do you think lawmakers on both sides of the aisle should go on this to keep this funded?
I think this should be a huge priority, Poppy, and I'm so glad you brought it up because it was going to be one of the things that I brought up as a messaging point that I think is really, really difficult for Republicans. Doug is right. Traditionally, in the last several years, Republicans have been blamed for shutting down the government. They will be blamed for shutting down the government if it happens on Friday. But more so from a messaging standpoint, they have a real problem here because millions of children are on the brink of losing their health insurance, and you have Republicans saying, yes, we absolutely want to fund the children's health insurance program. We just need to find a way to pay for it. On the day after they passed a $1.5 trillion tax bill that is not paid for, that gives billions of tax breaks to the wealthiest, to millionaires and billionaires like Trump and his friends, and to the wealthiest corporations who are making record profits right now. So right there, you are seeing the priorities of this Republican Congress and this Republican president, and children's health insurance and the livelihood and lives of our kids are not one of them.
Nathan, is that a fair assessment? Is that a fair read of Maria Cardona to say that Republicans, essentially saying Republicans don't care about funding this because they didn't include it in the tax bill? I mean, this was, not one of the key talking points in the tax bill. The question is, are they going to fund it in a continuing resolution? Are they going to fund it in the next, in the next budget process?
Well, we'll see what happens between, what happens in the next 24 hours and if it gets kicked to January, and then we have this discussion again. But what I think is fascinating about the shutdown is that I think Democrats they're not afraid of a shutdown because they think Republicans will get blamed for it. President Trump, I don't believe, is afraid of a shutdown because he thinks he can blame Democrats. And Doug brought up the 2013 shutdown. I think that's critical because there are some Republicans on the Hill who aren't afraid of a shutdown right now because they remember what happened in the 2014 elections when Republicans did well. The problem with that is what I think they don't remember is that after the 2013 government shutdown was the healthcare.gov rollout, which was an epic disaster, and it turned the conversation from Republicans in Congress back to President Obama and a polarizing piece of legislation. So no one's afraid of a shutdown right now, and I think that's why we've gotten this far.
I think we, the taxpayer, don't want to see a shutdown. We'd like the government we pay for to stay up and running. Maria Cardona, Nathan Gonzalez, Doug High, thank you very, very much. President Trump says Democrats, as you just heard, want to shut down the government. House Minority Whip Steny Hoyer joins me next with his reaction. Plus, a top Republican senator says there would be an uprising, a revolt, if the president moved to try to get the special counsel fired ahead. What the White House is saying, pushing back. And still in the dark, a grieving woman wants answers about what happened to her fiancé at the U.S.-Mexico border, and she speaks with CNN.
As special counsel, Robert Mueller faces growing criticism from Republicans. The top Democrat on the Senate Intel Committee, Senator Mark Warner, has issued a warning to the president.
Congress must make clear to the president that firing the special counsel or interfering with his investigation by issuing pardons of essential witnesses is unacceptable and would have immediate and significant consequences.
Okay, so here to discuss this and more, we have the top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, Congressman Adam Schiff. Good morning, Congressman.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm well. So the president says he's not considering firing Robert Mueller. His attorney, Ty Cobb, says the president is not going to do this. He calls it a baseless rumor. So do you believe them?
Well, I don't rely on them at all because we've seen in the past that the president changes his mind on a dime, sometimes multiple times a day. And if next week he decided to start putting pressure on Mueller again and started tweeting at him, or potentially going after Rod Rosenstein so he could appoint someone more pliable to limit Bob Mueller's scope, then he would have some explanation for his change of heart. So no, I don't think we can rely on this at all. I do think Congress ought to take up legislation to protect Bob Mueller and the investigation. And the spectacle that we're seeing in the House, where members of the House Intelligence Committee and House Judiciary Committee are attacking the FBI, they're attacking Bob Mueller, they're calling the FBI corrupt. All of this, I think, is only encouragement to the president that he can act in ways that would be destructive of our system of justice, and he'll have only too many quiescent partners in the House.
But maybe the plan is more subtle than what you think. I mean, maybe it's not getting rid of Rod Rosenstein. Maybe it's not following Bob Mueller. Maybe it's what you're talking about there, that just, chip away at Bob Mueller's reputation by saying things about him so that he stays in place, but when his findings come out, they're tainted somehow.
That's unquestionably part of the strategy of some of the House Republicans and the White House and Steve Bannon and their allies. And sadly, it is bearing some fruit. The independence of the Justice Department is being eroded. And we saw that in the release of these private text messages by the Department of Justice, not to Congress, but they went to the press directly to give internal messages of FBI agents during a pending Inspector General investigation. That never happens. So why did it happen? I think it's the Deputy Attorney General is feeling the pressure. And this is, I think, deeply dangerous to the independence of Bob Mueller's investigation. He needs to be allowed to do his work, not be interfered with, not have the Department of Justice violate policies in ways that threaten his investigation. And he needs to make sure that the Attorney General, Deputy Attorney General, needs to make sure that Bob Mueller has the scope to investigate with his charter to protect the American people.
You wrote that you wrote this week in an op-ed that you believe that the president is pressing House Republicans to stop their investigation. What's your evidence?
Well, he says it almost every day. We see that he intervened with the Senate Republicans, urging them to curtail their investigation. His proxies like Steve Bannon are out on TV saying we need to shut these investigations down. They're not hiding their hand. They're being quite deliberate about it, and unfortunately it's having its desired effect. We have scheduled no witnesses. The majority won't schedule any witnesses after January 1st, and there are dozens more that we need to bring in. They're scheduling interviews out of state while we're here voting on the tax bill, taking a lot of otherwise inexplicable steps unless it looks like they are bending to the will of the White House and the president's allies.
Yesterday, the Deputy FBI Director, Andrew McCabe, met for 8 hours behind closed doors with your committee. Can you share with us what you learned?
I can't go into any of the testimony before our committee. I can say more generally about Mr. McCabe that I think he has been a dedicated public servant to the country for a great many years. The bureau that he represents, I've worked with for almost 30 years and have the finest agents, I think, of any law enforcement agency. And the attacks on his character and on the character of the hardworking people at the bureau, I think is reprehensible. People calling for him to resign with no accusation, no proof of any wrongdoing on his part. It's grossly irresponsible. And this is going to do lasting damage. There's already enough erosion of public confidence in the institutions of our government, but to now discredit the FBI and the Department of Justice the way they're doing is just, I think, completely irresponsible.
Yeah, as you know, his critics say that because his wife ran for office as a Democrat and took money from Terry McAuliffe, that sort of disqualifies him. Do you think that, as Senator Chuck Grassley has suggested, that he will be fired?
No, I don't think he'll be fired. And what's more, people who work for the federal government are not precluded from having their spouses either have a political career or express political views. And some of the suggestions, for example, from, chairmen of committees in the House and Senate, that Bob Mueller should fire people on his team that contributed to a Democratic candidate. you can't ask people about their contributions. You can't discriminate against people that have participated in the political process and say, you're not going to be hired or you're going to be fired because you engaged in lawful political activity. And it shocks me to hear people in responsible positions of power making these arguments. And they're all the more shocking when you consider that each of the pivotal people doing this investigation, in terms of Bob Mueller and Christopher Wray and our Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, our Attorney General, these are all Republicans. And yet the GOP, at least in the House, is not satisfied with Republicans conducting an independent investigation of Republican administration. It's just preposterous.
Congressman Adam Schiff, thank you very much for being on New Day.
Thank you.
Bill.
A grieving woman is demanding answers about what happened to her fiancé at the U.S.-Mexico border. Why are there still so many?
Cuomo and Allison Camerata.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to your New Day. Chris is off. Bill Weir joins me. Another big breaking news day.
Exciting day for Republicans and the president.
It sure is. So there's this celebration at the White House after President Trump's first major legislative win, with the GOP heaping praise upon the president. But this morning there's uncertainty among everyday Americans, many waking up wondering when this will kick in, what impact they'll feel in their wallets.
Thoughts and prayers with all the folks in the accounting department as we figure out what to do with the W-4s. Plus, that bill includes the repeal of the individual mandate, which the president claims ends Obamacare. But does it really? Adding to the anxiety, a potential government shutdown looming over Capitol Hill. Tomorrow is the deadline, and right now, lawmakers do not have a spending plan to prevent it. We have it all covered, per usual, and we start this morning with Joe Johns live at the White House. Joe.
Bill, there's been a lot of excitement here at the White House over the tax bill, but one of the few things that could pour cold water on all the enthusiasm would be a government shutdown because they can't agree on a spending bill. It still seems unlikely at this point, but time is running out.
All friends. I mean, I look at these people, it's like we're warriors together.
President Trump celebrating the tax bill alongside congressional Republicans after months of attacking GOP leadership over previous legislative failures.
Paul Ryan and Mitch, it was a little team. We just got together and we would work very hard, didn't we? Huh? It seems like it was a lot of fun. It's always a lot of fun when you win.
The love fest continuing with Ryan and McConnell gushing over the president.
This has been a year of extraordinary accomplishment for the Trump administration.
Well, something this profound could not have been done without exquisite presidential leadership. Mr. President, thank you.
The quick passage of this legislation causing confusion for taxpayers on how they should prepare for the huge overhaul. The Treasury Department and the IRS scrambling to write new regulations. Republicans saying workers will feel the benefits of this tax cut in a matter of weeks.
On January 1, Americans are going to wake up with a new tax code. In February, they're going to see withholdings go down so they see bigger paychecks.
The tax bill making a big impact on the Affordable Care Act, eliminating the individual mandate, which fines Americans who don't have insurance. The president falsely claiming he's repealed Obamacare. He did not. Republicans tried to do that through legislation and failed.
So in this bill, not only do we have massive tax cuts and tax reform, we have essentially repealed Obamacare, and we'll come up with something that will be much better.
President Trump selling this tax overhaul as a Christmas present for the middle class, with some companies already delivering on the promise. Comcast and AT&T promising $1,000 bonuses to their employees, and Wells Fargo hiking its minimum wage. Meanwhile, companies like Pfizer and Coca-Cola validating Democrats' concerns, saying they'll turn over most gains to their shareholders.
Is that what you intended? Give them more money so they can buy back more stock, increasing the wealth of corporate CEOs?
As the tax bill makes its way to the president's desk, Republicans now have just 2 days to pass a spending bill to avoid shutting down the government. A closed-door meeting of House Republicans late Wednesday night, ending with more questions than answers. There are still some administrative steps to be taken before the president gets the opportunity to sign the tax bill. We hear he's anxious to do so and might even sign it from Mar-a-Lago if necessary. Nothing on the president's public schedule right now. The big question, of course, is whether he will hold a customary year-end news conference. We'll get back to you on that.
Please do, Joe. Let us know when you have any breaking news on that front. Meanwhile, joining us to discuss all of this, we have CNN political director David Chalian and CNN senior political analyst and senior editor at The Atlantic, Ron Brownstein. Great to see both of you. So, David, let's put up for our viewers what we know is in, what is out. There's so much uncertainty, obviously, for people waking up this morning wondering how their lives have changed. So, you know, the president said that the individual mandate has been repealed from Obamacare, and that means that Obamacare has been repealed, he said. Not true, but here's what it looks like. The individual mandate goes away. This is what comes out. It's effective in 2019. The cost-sharing subsidies that have gotten a lot of attention over the past couple of months, those go away. Here's what stays in. Medicaid expansion, the pre-existing conditions protections, which arguably was one of the most popular provisions. No lifetime cap on benefits, also popular. The subsidies to low and moderate income customers. But is his point taken that if the individual mandate goes away, the rest can't survive for long?
Well, there is sort of a house of cards to this a little bit, and so it is a blow to Obamacare. He's wrong that it's repealed, obviously. You just pointed that out. And remember, most people who got coverage under the Affordable Care Act got it through the Medicaid expansion. That's where the largest chunk of Americans were able to get coverage previously unavailable to them. So that is still there, of course. But remember, Allison, what was the point of the individual mandate? Why was it in there? It was to basically force a larger customer base for insurance companies so that insurance companies would buy into this whole process. And if you no longer require everyone to have it, and you only have, older, sicker people with insurance, and no longer are the younger, healthier people who may avoid it forced to get it or required to get it, you start upending the way that the system is built. So it certainly is a blow to the design of the whole system.
Yeah, you need younger people in the pool to pay for the older, sickly people. Ron, let's play this sound by the president talking about the mandate and how he sort of hid the ball.
We didn't want to bring it up. I told people specifically, be quiet with the fake news media because I don't want them talking too much about it, because I didn't know how people would. But now that it's approved, I can say the individual mandate on health care, where you had to pay not to have insurance. Okay, think of that one. You pay not to have insurance. The individual mandate has been repealed.
Well, some predictions are that repealing that mandate means premiums for everybody could go up 10%. Yeah. Millions of people could lose insurance there. David, what is Ron, what does this say about the relationship with Congress and him and the discipline they had to get this done?
Well, there are a couple of paradoxes here. First, people may not remember, but in 2008, during the primaries, David will remember, Barack Obama opposed the individual mandate. That was the big difference between him and Hillary Clinton. He wanted the system without the mandate. He thought the subsidies would be enough to keep people in the system without it. But in fact, as David noted, I mean, the general consensus, I think, among all health economists is that if you withdraw the mandate, what you lose are some of the younger, healthier people who would not buy coverage without it. And as a result, who are the losers? They are older people with bigger health needs. Well, you know, the Republican coalition is now centered on older white America. A majority of Donald Trump's votes came from white people over 45. And those, particularly in the interior states, which were so important to his victory, will be the big losers in this shift. They are the ones who are most likely to face higher premiums as a result of young people moving out of the system. And I think it is one example of the challenges they will have changing the initial perception of this bill. You know, it's worth noting here that, you know, in the CNN poll the other day, 33% support, lower than we've seen for any other tax cut, lower than we've seen for other tax increases, and significantly lower, I think most relevantly, than the Affordable Care Act itself in the spring of 2000, and where the ACA was, which was the low 40s, contributed to the Republican landslide in the fall of 2010. So Republicans do have a lot of repair work that they need between now and next November to make this bill something other than a weight on their prospects.
But David, I think there's something else that we need to talk about that's important in what the president just said. He was trying to keep the information away from the press about the individual mandate.
That means away from the American people. Let's be clear.
That's how the public gets information about what's going on in Capitol Hill and the White House, through the press. So he didn't want the American public to know that they were losing the individual mandate.
So I don't know if you remember, there was an event either last week or the week before. He was in the Roosevelt Room and he hinted at this. He refused to name healthcare, but he said, there's another big policy goal in here. We're really thrilled with this other thing in here that shall not be named. And it was clear he was talking about healthcare. And at that moment, it was astonishing to me that just plainly on camera, the President of the United States was refusing to name and talk about something he believed was a huge achievement he was pushing for, but did not want the American people to know about it or focus on it. He just wanted it to happen. And then he admitted as such yesterday in the cabinet room. It is odd to hear the president simply say, I didn't want you all to know that this was happening, but I'm so happy it happened.
Yeah, it's troubling. I mean, it's troubling to hear the president in his own words say, we didn't want the public to know this, we wanted to sneak it through. Now, that said, it was a very poorly kept secret. We've been reporting on it for weeks, that the individual mandate was in there. But still, you saw how gleeful he was that he was able to try to keep it from the public.
Allison, I think, also it was reflective of the entire process, what a closed circle this was. I mean, people, to understand how extraordinary this was, just remember, Ronald Reagan had 24 Democratic senators and 113 in the House vote for his tax cut. George W. Bush had 12 Democratic senators, 28 in the House. Not a single Democrat in either chamber voted for this bill or was even really involved at any point in negotiating it. Same thing with kind of outside expert advice. There is no independent economic analysis that concludes anything like what the administration is claiming for the bill. The Penn-Wharton business model, Wharton, which Donald Trump, touts now and then, says it will increase the debt by $2 trillion through 2027 and increase economic growth by 0.1% annually. Goldman Sachs just put out a projection that it might actually slow economic growth after 2020 because of the increased debt that will be taken on. This was a process, as Jim Tankersley quoted in the New York Times the other day, of Republicans essentially walling themselves off from any outside view to pass this bill solely with Republican votes in a way that is tilted toward Republican constituencies. It still imposes burdens on Democratic constituencies, particularly in blue states, through the way it revokes, limits federal deductibility of state and local taxes. I mean, this is a very closed circle, and as I said, it underscores it's a big policy victory, no question. It is an even bigger political gamble.
As non-democracy leaders around the world, non-democratic leaders, it's amazing what you can get done when you don't care about public opinion. But speaking of that, our newest polls, David, which party are you most likely to vote for in next year's midterm election? The Democrats, 56, GOP, 38%.
Yeah, that 18-point spread there in our latest poll is huge. I mean, that is a huge warning sign for Republicans that a potential Democratic wave is building. We haven't seen a spread like that in nearly 2 decades. And if you go inside, you also see how independents are driving a huge part of this. This is a big part of the pieces of the coalition that elected Donald Trump. Remember, independents were part of that for him back in November 2016. They have so drastically peeled away from him throughout this year. It is going to be very difficult for them to try to win them back throughout this year, but that's going to be mission number one, because these independent voters live in a lot, as Ron will tell you, a lot of these suburban districts where many of these competitive House races are taking place, and they're upside down 15 points right now on the generic congressional ballot among independents.
And what's real significant to me about this polling, real quick, is that it confirms what we're seeing in actual election results. I mean, you look inside this poll. First of all, there are 4 other national public polls this month with a double-digit Democratic congressional lead in the congressional ballot. And historically, if you look over the last decade or so, usually on Election Day, it is worse for the party in the White House on Election Day than it is in the polling in December, as a Republican polling firm noted yesterday. But what's really important, I think, is that the polling results are consistent with the actual election performance. You're seeing big margins toward Democrats among precisely the groups that are most disillusioned by President Trump. Minority voters, young voters, and these college-educated suburban white voters, especially women. They were the groups that moved in Alabama, in New Jersey, and in Virginia, and they are the same groups that are powering this lead in the poll. But they are all consistent with each other, and they all point to a challenge for Republicans, particularly in those suburban districts.
Listen, that said, there's still a lot of help get the Republican tax plan over the finish line. So now the group's chairman says they need to make some big changes. What he wants to do next.
As the end of 2017 approaches, could we see the president hold one last press conference before 2018? It's a tradition many former commanders-in-chief have held, and so far there has been no public events on the schedule. But today, let's talk about it with CNN senior media correspondent Brian Stelter. Morning, Brian, and media analyst Bill Carter.
Morning.
Gentlemen, good to be with you. What do you think, Brian?
Tradition? You said this is traditional?
Tradition. There's no
Presidents
such thing.
traditionally do this.
You know how traditional President Trump is.
That's the only reason why I doubt there'll be a press conference. I actually think there will be today. The president's feeling very good, very confident in the wake of yesterday's tax event. So it's a great reason for him to come out and speak and tout what he says are his accomplishments for the year.
Yeah, so, go ahead.
However, he tends to enjoy adulation more than interrogation.
There is that.
Yes.
So it'd be interesting to see. He obviously is feeling very puffed up, but the questions will not only be about, oh, this is great for you. There'll be all kinds of other questions that he may not want to have. But
could have Roy Moore, could have Russia, could have
exactly
sexual harassment.
Yeah, I think his lawyers may be advising him not to go ahead and do one of these press conferences. But normally, you think about the visual at the end of the year, not just President Obama, past presidents as well, would come out. They would have a formal press conference, usually in the afternoon, usually on all the major networks. So everybody has a chance to see the president before they head off for Christmas. But President Trump, of course, is different. For 6 months, his presidency has been defined by two kinds of press appearances. Either the shouted question when he's walking to Marine One, reporters try to shout a question, he might answer a few, or it's a friendly interview on Fox News, not with a journalist, but with a supporter of his. Those have been his two types of main press appearances. He does not sit down for interviews with major networks, really ever since Mueller was appointed. He doesn't give interviews to major networks, and he doesn't hold those kind of traditional press conferences. The last one, the sort of kind of last one like we might see today, it was in the lobby at Trump Tower when he famously talked about Charlottesville in that very ugly way back in August.
Right, so those sometimes go off the rails. We might have a montage of some of the memorable moments of
There have been some
interactions, so let us play this.
Okay, sit down. I understand the rest of your question. So here's the story, folks. Number one, I am the least anti-Semitic person that you've ever seen in your entire life. Number two, racism. The least racist person. I'm really not a bad person, by the way. No, but the tone is such. I do get good ratings, you have to admit that. I'm not ranting and raving. I'm just telling you, you're dishonest people. But I'm not ranting and raving. Again, you're going to give her the same one?
No, she's not the same lady.
Go ahead.
They are sitting side by side.
We have a lot of blonde women in Finland.
I do think there's blame. Yes, I think there's blame on both sides. You look at both sides. I think there's blame on both sides, and I have no doubt about it, and you don't have any doubt about it either.
Right. So these don't go as planned. You know.
No, and I think he likes that format. He likes the freewheeling. I think he came out of all those feeling like he did great.
Right. His aides dread it, but he's
they stand in the background cowering, but he sort of enjoys it. I do think it's kind of interesting. It's also a tradition that on the Super Bowl, the president sits down with the network that's hosting. That would be NBC, and he would probably have to sit down with Lester Holt again, and that did not go well for him.
So do we know if he's going to do it? Has he agreed to sit down with NBC?
We don't know. We don't know. There's great ratings on Super Bowl Sunday, but the president really has been insulated. He really has avoided those kinds of situations where he might get asked uncomfortable questions about Russia or other subjects.
You got to wonder if
that's why today is a curiosity.
If we lived in a world without Twitter, would he feel more beholden to the old thing? He can vent this way.
And by the way, he's going to be in Mar-a-Lago for a week, right? That's when he's at his most loose in himself on Twitter.
Most Twittery,
I know everyone wants to have a vacation between Christmas and New Year's, but we'll see what he says.
So I want to ask you guys about the optics of yesterday's Republican Love Fest right there. Let's roll it. As the president was walking out to greet all the supporters of the bill, he had them arranged neatly on both staircases coming down there, and his hand gestures as he was pointing to Orrin Hatch and all of these folks reminded me of a certain optic, and we know he sets these things. He thinks as a producer of a TV show. This is Rainer Hirsch, a comedic conductor, but I was thinking of Leonard Bernstein, the idea that he is the maestro, that he is the guy pulling all these disparate forces together, but of course Congress is nothing like an orchestra. The first chair tuba player, has to suck up to the conductor, but ultimately answers to us. But who's playing who in this particular case, right? Who's using who? And how will those images be used both for opposition ads and for those running.
We've never had as theatrical a president as this guy. He obviously is a performer. That's what he's doing. But the thing with the cabinet and Pence yesterday was so over the top. I mean, it was like, it really put the sick and sycophantic. I think really over.
It was a new level of brown nosing.
We have been covering that. But Brian, I want to move on and talk to you about some very incendiary misinformation that was put out on Fox. It was during their midday show, and one of their guests said something really inflammatory. And we have to talk about what Fox is going to do about that. So let me play for everybody this moment where he talked about what the FBI might have been planning for President Trump. Listen to this.
I think they're going to say, what was his intent, right? Because that's exactly what former FBI Director Comey said when he was letting Hillary Clinton off the hook. And his intent, regardless of whether it was an assassination attempt or whatever, was definitely something.
Whoa.
Well, and I'm just saying, we don't know what it was. When you say we've got to make sure that this guy, doesn't get in at all costs, what does that mean? So I'm saying there's a spectrum of what does it mean. But one thing that we know for sure is that he was plotting in an election against a candidate, and there's FBI fingerprints all over this.
Very quickly, he said he got this on social media.
Yeah.
That's crap. That's not facts.
Yeah.
So how is Fox addressing that to get the real
information?
information?
This is the new low of the anti-Mueller, anti-FBI attacks. Fox says it's addressing it with the guest, but there's a word for that. There's a word for it. It's propaganda.
Yeah.
And hopefully people see through it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bill, Brian, thank you both very much. And thanks to our international viewers for watching. For you, CNN Newsroom is next. For our U.S. viewers, New Day continues right now.
The message to the families in America, your tax rates are going down and your paychecks are going up.
President Donald Trump delivered.
We essentially repealed.
Virginia Democrat Mark Warner, the ranking member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, is drawing a red line over what he calls coordinated attacks against Special Counsel Robert Mueller.
Any attempt by this president to remove Special Counsel Mueller from his position or to pardon key witnesses in any effort to shield them from accountability or shut down the investigation would be a gross abuse of power. These truly are red lines and simply cannot allow them to be crossed.
Warner told CNN he is actually worried the president might make a move during the upcoming congressional recess. So let's bring back in our CNN political analysts, Karen Drucker, Karin Demerjian. Karin, what do you think, what about the timing of Warner's statements there?
I mean, it's clearly meant to be a warning as Congress is probably going to be leaving Washington, D.C. for a period of time for about 10 days and leaving the president potentially to his own devices. Look, the Senate right now has been grappling with whether or not to try to combine these two proposals of a bill that would prevent the president from being able to order a firing of Special Counsel Mueller without it being put to a 3-judge panel to actually review that order and make sure that it sounds legal. This has been going on for months and months and months that they've been dragging their feet. Republicans mostly have been dragging their feet about actually doing something, and Democrats are getting very, very angry about that because basically it leaves them with no recourse to try, or no immediate recourse to try to prevent the president from getting rid of the special counsel while nobody is around to actually, rush in and stop him from doing that. It is the president's ability to do that, at least to order it through the acting, the deputy AG, right, Rod Rosenstein, who has said he doesn't see reason to fire him. So basically you have to set up a new Saturday Night Massacre-esque situation to get this to actually happen. But again, Congress gets nervous about what the White House is going to do over these long periods of time that they're out of D.C. in a normal year, and this is not a normal year, and this is not a normal investigation in terms of both what it's doing and how the president's reacting to it, which is consistently negatively.
But David, listen, I mean, this is what we need help understanding. The president has said he's not considering firing Mueller. He can't. He has to order Rod Rosenstein. Rod Rosenstein says he sees no reason, he's not considering it. Then the president's lawyer issued this statement.
Yeah, if the media is going to continue to ask for responses to every absurd and baseless rumor, attention-seeking partisans will continue to spread them. Basically, not even considering it, never considered it, stop.
Word is next.
I'm Christine Romans.
I'm Dave Briggs. This just in, Joe Biden has finally stopped praising the president. I think he had to sleep at some point, so it just now came to a close. It's Thursday, December 21st. It's 4 a.m. in the East, 6 p.m. in Seoul. It's It's 11 a.m. in Jerusalem. We'll check in there shortly. We start, though, with the Republicans taking a victory lap for passing their tax reform, tax cut bill, which now just awaits the president's signature. But in touting the bill as a huge tax cut, the president himself made what could be a serious tactical error, admitting the measure was just as much about gutting Obamacare.
The individual mandate is being repealed. So in this bill, not only do we have massive tax cuts and tax reform, we have essentially repealed Obamacare. We didn't want to bring it up. I told people specifically, be quiet with the fake news media because I don't want them talking too much about it, because I didn't know how people would. But now that it's approved, I can say the individual mandate has been repealed.
It is important to note Obamacare has not been repealed. Those GOP efforts failed this year. It is the individual mandate that has been repealed, stuck in this tax bill, and it may destabilize Obamacare by reducing the incentive for young, healthy people to buy insurance. The Congressional Budget Office has said repealing just the individual mandate will likely raise premiums to help cover older, sicker people, but it will also save the government money as people drop out of the subsidized Obamacare marketplaces.
By admitting the tax bill was a vehicle for hurting Obamacare, the president also handed Democrats potentially a powerful talking point for 2018. None of that got in the way of the Republicans' love fest yesterday, one which I misquoted, saying Joe Biden was praising the president. That, of course, was the man you see there, Mike Pence. Even with funding for the government set to run out tomorrow, latest, let's bring in CNN's Abby Phillip from the White House.
Well, Christine and Dave, the president and Republicans were jubilant at the White House with the passage of the first major legislative victory of his administration. The president talked a lot about the corporate tax rate going down and the money that will be coming back home from overseas. But Republicans had nothing but praise for him and his leadership, getting them over the finish line on this bill. Take a listen.
Something this profound could not have been done without exquisite presidential leadership.
This has been a year of extraordinary accomplishment for the Trump administration.
And we're going to make this the greatest presidency that we've seen, not only in generations, but maybe ever.
President Donald Trump delivered a great victory for the American people.
We're all friends. I mean, I look at these people, it's like we're warriors together.
But the battle for Republicans may still be ahead, with just a third of Americans supporting the tax bill that they just passed. And about 66% of Americans say that the middle class will not benefit as much as the wealthy. The White House is fully aware that they have a little bit more work to do to sell this bill, Christine and Dave. That's going to be next on the agenda for President Trump.
All right, Abby, thank you. The president has yet to sign that tax bill, but companies wasted no time announcing plans to pass some of their big tax savings to their employees, supporting the claim that corporate tax cuts will help workers. The bill cuts the corporate rate to 21% from 35%. Two banks, Wells Fargo and Fifth Third, say they will hike their minimum wages to $15 an hour. Comcast and AT&T promised $1,000 bonuses to more than 300,000 employees. Banks and telecoms will be two of the biggest winners of a lower tax rate. Both industries pay high effective tax rates. Banks alone could see their profits jump maybe 25%. While AT&T CEO Randall Stephenson praised the bill in a statement congratulating both Congress